Tuesday, June 21st, 2022. So request staff confirmation that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
The packet was posted and the required notice of the meeting was provided.
Okay, we'll go to roll call.
I'll ask for, see who's present. Commissioner Gilmore, Commissioner Mikesell,
Late, but here.
Commissioner Farber,
Here.
Commissioner Jones,
Here.
Commissioner Waters,
Here.
Commissioner Hay, Vice Chair Olson.
Here.
So we have now, with the arrival of Mr. Mikesell, a quorum of 5, and we have provided notice of today's meeting and as well as notice to property owners that adjoin these two agenda items today. So before we proceed to item 2, I would like to introduce Madeline Blake, who is serving as an intern with the city in the Community and Development Services Department, and she's working on planning now. And I'll just ask Madeline to give you a brief overview of where she is in her studies and what she's hoping to gain from her internship. And then we have another introduction. So,
I'm going to be a junior at KU, so just got done with my sophomore year. Majoring in public administration, so trying to see what area I'd like to go into. I'm still considering law school, so really just hoping to kind of get out of this summer some answers for what I'm going to be doing the next 2 years, so yeah.
and then I would like to introduce Greg Bankston, our city attorney, so I'm sure you all know, and he has a clerk that's working with his firm who's also present at today's meeting. I'd let Greg introduce her and let you know what she's been doing with Clark Mize.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew. Mr. Chairman, Greg Bengtson with Clark Mize and Linville, the city's legal counsel. It's our privilege this summer to have Hannah McCune clerking with us. She is a third-year law student at Washburn. And as is our practice with clerks, they have opportunity to work with all of the lawyers in the office. And Hannah's had an opportunity to observe the Airport Authority meeting and has wanted to come over and see your deliberations this afternoon. So we appreciate that opportunity.
Welcome. Thank you.
So I'll turn it back over to Chair Olson to consider our minutes from our last meeting in June.
All right, so do I have a motion for approval of the minutes from the June 2nd, 2022 meeting?
Mr. Vice Chair, I move we approve the minutes from our last meeting.
I second.
Okay, so we have a motion and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, motion carries 5-0. That takes us to new business and application PDD 86-2E filed by Presbyterian Manors.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These are both our items today under new business are public hearing items. They're also quasi-judicial items. And the first application is filed by Presbyterian Manors, Inc., and they are requesting approval of a planned development district ordinance and approval of an amended final development plan to allow construction of 29 new cottages in the northeast corner of their campus, as well as a wellness center addition on their main building. And the property is the 40-acre Salina Presbyterian Manor campus, which is located on the north side of East Crawford, east of Sites Drive. And the main building there is addressed as 2601 East Crawford Street. The original hearing on this was advertised for your last meeting, June 7th, but at the request of the applicant, the hearing was continued to today's meeting. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Hers to give you a background of what's occurred at Presbyterian Manor prior to this and what the nature of the current request is.
Thank you, Mr. Andrew and Commission. So on the overhead screen, we do have an aerial photo of the existing Presbyterian Manor campus, and it consists of a main building with various types of assisted living quarters in that main building, as well as some freestanding structures that also have various types of assisted living for individuals who are elderly or needing of this type of residency. And so the Presbyterian Manor approached city staff a while back about a potential expansion. The plan for the Presbyterian Manor originally goes back to 1977 and has had several phases and amendments that have happened since then. So over time, we've had 4, 5, if you think about, if you consider the fact that phase 1 has also been amended, 5 different amendments coming into this particular revision or amendment of the plan. So this is part of a plan development district, which means every time an amendment is required of the site plan or the final development plan, it's required to come before this body for review and approval. And the things that this board is looking at is you're looking to address the location, the height, appearance of any buildings, the parking lot, landscaping, lighting, drainage, utilities, and street access, things of that nature. So those are the things that you look at as a board when you're reviewing a plan development district. So phase 1 was the original plan, as I mentioned, happened in 1977, and that was a plan to go from A1 to R2, and we do have a copy of the most recent plan. The phase 2 happened in 1986 and added 5 duplexes. In 1994, phase 3 occurred, which was an additional 5 duplexes, and then in 2000, or actually 97, 7 additional duplexes were added for phase 4, and then there was a phase 5 redevelopment that was really the 5th phase, if you will, or 5th rendition of amendments for this particular property, in which a memory care facility was added to the main structure of the facility and the campus. And so that brings us to phase 5. So our last phase was amended in 2005. Phase 5 is a proposal for 29 new cottage-style structures, single-family structures in the vacant space north of the existing development. So here on the screen, you've got a drawing of the entire campus, and that shows the 2 main things that we're looking at today, and that's the 29 new cottage-style units, as well as an addition for what they call their wellness center. And their wellness center has things like pools, workout exercise rooms, things of that nature for the residents. So those are the 2 things that we'll be looking at for this particular amendment. As Mr. Andrew noted, this was brought to the City Commission, or to the Planning Commission our last meeting, and the applicant requested that the plans be postponed in order to meet their clients' needs in terms of the representation and have more time to get some things taken care of. So I'm going to bring up a table that we have in the staff report, and you'll find this on the page 4 and 5, and this is really a summary of the evolution of the plan development district, with this particular plan development district having 5 different phases. It's kind of confusing as to what happens when, and so what we try to do is, working with the applicant, create a table that has the different types of units that have been added over time and in their various phases. So phase 1, you had 110 units here that you can see on this chart. If you were to go out there to date, you would notice that there are 173 units that were actually constructed as part of that phase 1 because of the 2005 amendment that was done in phase 1. Phase 2, there was originally it was planned to have 61 units, but we had 10 units that were actually built. Phase 3, it was planned to have 115 units, however, 10 were built. Phase 4 had 50 units planned, 14 of those were constructed, and now Phase 5, which was not part of the original plan, is proposing 29 units in the amended PDD, as well as a renovation to some of the general common amenity space that would add the addition for the Wellness Center. And at the bottom of that, you'll have a total of your total units. And originally, the Plan Development District had 336 units. The plan is still to have 336 units, with 103 of those units being unidentified future development in this chart. And so above the chart that or this table that we're looking at, we also have a breakdown of some of the bulk qualities that the particular property has. So the original development had 336 units. The applicant is maintaining that density with 103 outstanding potential units being added later. The anticipated density for the entire development will remain 8.4, which is consistent with the original plan, 8.4 units per acre, that is. And the proposed total gross floor area will be a little over 317,000 square feet, with the overall lot coverage occupying 11% of the total 40 acres of the site, which is less than what you typically would find for a residentially zoned development. Parking is always a concern when we talk about adding units, and in this particular case, if we look at the aerial photo, there is an existing parking lot that is located to the southeast of the building, of the existing building, where the proposed wellness addition will be taking place. That wellness addition will displace all of this parking, and that parking will be relocated to the southeast side of the private street known as Horizon Drive. And I'll show a plan of that here. So if we look at this addition, this area highlighted in the blue box, that's where the new addition is taking place. The replaced parking is in the area just to the south of that. So here's a zoomed in example of what we're looking at. And this is the new parking. So that parking table that was created by the applicant for our review here today says that originally or existing, there are 112 off-street parking spaces. 22 of those are covered, 90 of them are uncovered, and after the proposed addition and the replacement of the parking lot, the new parking load or capacity will be 133 off-street parking spaces. So when we're looking at the streets, utilities, and fire protection, we're looking at what street access is being provided. Are they private? Are they public? What water access is being provided? Is it private? Is it public? Same thing with our sanitary sewer and our storm drainage. On the screen here is a breakdown or a site plan drawing showing the location of existing fire hydrants in relation to the proposed dwellings, as well as the existing and proposed water lines. So down here on the south side of your screen would be where the main building is. And north of the main building, there is an easement for water lines. And in that easement, there is a 6-inch water line. And what the applicant is proposing is 2 8-inch water lines that would connect to the 6-inch water line, run north, and proposed utility easements up to Brookwood, where you have an existing 8-inch line. And there will be a similar parallel line on the west side. So you have two 8-inch lines that connect the 6-inch line that's existing on the Presbyterian Manor property and connecting and looping back into the 8-inch line in Brookwood. So that is how water will be serviced to the site. It would be a public line and would require a public easement. One thing that staff did note when doing their analysis from both a utility standpoint and a fire protection standpoint is that while we have good coverage to the south and potentially to the north, we do have a number of units that are uncovered under the current plan, and then at least 2 fire hydrants will need to be added along that easement, that utility easement, to have full coverage of all of the units that are being looped around. For street coverage, there is a existing private drive, and what the applicant is proposing is a drive called North View Circle that would also be private and would loop into the existing drive all the way around to provide access for the 29 units. And there's also, I'll pull up a different plan here, a connection for emergency access onto Brookwood Lane. So Brookwood Lane is not fully developed because directly north of this property we have county farm ground, and so before Brookwood Lane can fully be built out and constructed, we would have to have that property to the north platted with right-of-way dedicated in order to have the full width of right-of-way to go all the way to homes, and at which point Northview would connect directly to Brookwood, but for the time being, the applicant is proposing to have a temporary fire access lane for emergency purposes. I'll pull up an aerial photo to make that make a little more sense. So currently there is a hike-bike trail of sorts that provides access for students within the Quail Hollow Drive and Prairie Lane area where they can walk to get to school. But Brookwood itself does dead end, and the reason it dead ends is because we do not have right-of-way on the north half. So you see this pink dotted line, that is the city limit line, and this is all undeveloped county ground directly to the north all the way over to Holmes Road. At some point when this becomes developed, Brookwood would go all the way through, and you would have sufficient right-of-way for the street paving, but for the time being, the applicant is proposing a temporary access point in which emergency access could access the Presbyterian Manor facility off of the Brookwood Lane dead end. And that's what that looks like here on the drawing. So we also, when we look at plan development districts, particularly amendments, we look at, is it a substantial change from what has been previously planned and approved? And so on page 6, you'll see some of those criteria. As noted when we went over the table that's been provided for us by the applicant, staff does not see any significant changes in terms of the density. We're still looking at 8.4 units per acre density. We also have a lot coverage of 11%, which the R2 regulations would allow up to 35%. So those would not be major changes. The ordinance itself, which is the 1977 ordinance, it's number 8569. Staff does believe that it has become outdated over time. If you were to read it, it doesn't give staff a lot of guidance or future landowners or present landowners or future developers and architects and designers of the site much guidance in terms of what the bulk regulations are and how to administer the existing plan of the PDD. So it's vague and requires amending and updating, particularly because of the age of it and the number of times that the existing PDD has been amended, with it being amended 5 times, this being the 6th time. Staff does believe that the ordinance, as we go through this process, should be updated. So staff, when we get to the point of moving forward with potentially taking this to the city commission, staff will work with the applicant to produce a new ordinance that would be taken to the city commission for their consideration. Some comments or thoughts that staff does have with the proposed plan is we have some confusion and that could be cleared up by the applicant, and we'll kind of walk through some of those items and go through those comments, those concerns. One is that the plan needs to clearly delineate the boundaries and areas and square footages of Phase 5. That is brought up because we have kind of 2 different areas. We have the 29 cottages that are on the north side. Staff arbitrarily used a boundary of the north property line, east property line, and the black line that's listed here, or shown here rather, portrayed on the site plan, and just an arbitrary line to the south to kind of get a feel for the area. Staff would be more comfortable if the applicant defined quantitatively the area that we're dealing with specifically, so that we can calculate the lot coverage not just for the whole campus, but specifically for Lot 5. It also would help us with identifying setback requirements and proposed setbacks. So one thing you'll notice on the plan is, because of the elevation changes that this property has, there's quite a bit of contour change, and those contours are on the plan, so that's difficult to kind of pick up some of the other lines that are important, such as water lines, sewer lines, the curbs, the dimensions of the street, whether or not the easement dimensions are matching up with all of the proposed water lines. It's difficult to see on the plan, and so having some of the layers of information removed, such as contours, and then making other layers of information easier to read, I think would be very helpful to staff. And then also having the proposed setbacks shown. So when we look at a plan, we're looking at, well, how far set back from the private street are the structures? How far set back are the different structures from each other? And there isn't a hard consistency with the plan. So we don't know if it appears some are maybe 13 feet, others are like 20 feet apart, but we don't have a prescribed setback distance that's being proposed. And then what are the rear yard setbacks being proposed? Because we do have some units that are adjacent or back up to a property line on the rear, and that happens along Brookwood as well as on the east property line. So having some of those pieces of information better shown, I think, would be very helpful, so that we can actually, when we get to the building permit phase, staff's concern is, how do we know that we're meeting the plan? Because we just don't have enough quantifiable information. So that's one of the items that we feel needs to be more clearly delineated. The second item is to provide or indicate the proposed square footages of the dwelling footprints and proposed front, side, and rear yard setbacks, which we just talked about. The footprint of the structure appears to be the same for all of the different units. And I think what the applicant has done is to use the same footprint as a placeholder, because they are proposing 4 different styles of development, or different styles of dwelling units. And so I'll pull those up here. So there's an A, building elevation, and all of these appear to have a combination of vertical wood siding, horizontal wood siding, as well as masonry and broken facades, where it's not just a box, but there's porches, there's different architectural elements that jut out from the surface, things of that nature. So this would be the A design, Then you have a B design, which is a little bit different, and all of these have a different facade. They all have a different floor plan, but I believe they are all single family, 1 or 2 bedroom units. Here is C, which is a little bit different yet again, and then D. So there's 4 different models. They all have different footprints. They all have different building elevations. And one of the things that staff could help be clarified is having the footprints match the proposed dwellings and where they're going to go, as well as having them identified, meaning this is an A model, this is a B model, this is a D model, this is a C, and then having their square footages noted, because they do, I believe they have different square footages as well. So having that information more tightly toned would also help when you get to the point of working with the applicant and issuing building permits. Number 3, provide a profile of the proposed private streets, including the right-of-way and paving widths, if right-of-way is being proposed, or if they're completely private, at least having the utility easement dimensions that are associated in those areas, because it appears to staff that there is a utility easement that runs roughly underneath the street, but they are not completely synonymous, where there's some parts that overlap and other parts that do not. But having information of what that street is and where the boundaries of the street are in relation to the dwelling units that connect to it would be very helpful. Number 4, provide a proposed internal private street name for the private streets that connect Horizon Drive to Northview Circle. Specifically, that is where I'm showing my cursor here. So when you come into the Presbyterian Manor, the first road that you'll see is Horizon Drive, and that goes on the west side and kind of the south and east side of the main facility. And then there are some other offshoot streets that branch off of Horizon Drive for the previous duplexes that have been developed on the site. One thing that the plan is missing is a name for the street that's going to go off of Horizon Drive to the north side of the facility that connects to the proposed Northview Circle. So we would need a name for that particular street so that it's clear how the network fully functions and connects back to Crawford. Identify any new utility easements that will need to be dedicated by separate instrument. We've talked about the water line easements that connect the 6-inch water line up to the 8-inch line in Brookwood. Those will need to be really clarified and clearly seen. 6, identify the proposed use of the building in the southeast corner of Phase 5. So there is a structure that appears to have a rectangular shape that is unidentified. It isn't labeled. We're anticipating that it's a type of maintenance facility of some kind or storage shed, but it isn't labeled on the plan, so that would need to be clarified. And then number 7, the number of parking spaces being eliminated in Phase 1 by the wellness facility. So we believe there's 25 parking spaces being eliminated, and then 37 or so new spaces being added, but it doesn't add up to the math that the applicant gave us in the parking table on the plan. So just clarification of how many spaces are being eliminated compared to the number of spaces that are being added, so that we have a clear cut continuing count of off-street parking spaces available for the campus. And then at the public hearing, we would also request that the applicant provide staff with additional information of where post-development runoff for Phase 5 is being directed. The campus does have a pond in which it has a dual purpose of stormwater retention as well as recreational use. And we would like confirmation of if this is where stormwater is being run to, and if not, information of if it's going to the northeast, how we're going to get the water across the ditch up here because there is some bottlenecking that we've been experiencing with the ditch that comes. There's a drainage ditch that runs north-south and discharges onto this field under a point here where there's this path, and that particular point is kind of a bottleneck or a choke point that's currently causing some water flooding or backup in the northeast corner. And so we would have the applicant's engineer address that issue. And then the wellness center itself that is being proposed at the southeast corner of the building, what all that is being proposed for, or what all the uses are. It looks like from the plans that there's a swimming pool and an exercise area, and we would ask the applicant to describe how that fits in with the operations of the facility, if it's open to other people in the public. Some facilities like this have a membership where they have a pool or an exercise room that could be used for the residents, but also has an ability for other people in the neighborhood to purchase a membership to use it. We aren't clear if that's what we're dealing with here, if this is a space that is truly accessory to the facility and reserved solely for the residents that are residing on the campus. So staff would ask those questions, and if the applicant is able to answer them to the commission's liking, we do have a couple of conditions that we would recommend on page 8. And I guess at that, staff would answer any questions that you might have.
Questions for staff?
Dustin, on phase 5 there's a little rectangular pad in the southwest corner of that drawing. What is that?
Let me see if I can get the right one. This here, or are you talking about this?
No, that's the southeast.
Southwest.
Southwest.
Oh.
That little.
I think this is indicating something existing. Let me pull up an aerial photo. Yeah, we'll have to ask the applicant. Is it
Okay.
this here? No.
Doesn't look like it's oriented right.
It'd be about that.
We'll save that for the applicant.
Sure, yeah. Any other questions of staff before we hear from the
Yeah, I
applicant?
do have one question for you. So you talked about the fitness facility and whether that was just strictly for residents and
Correct.
staff there, or if it was going to be open to public. If
Correct.
it's open to public, then does that change the parking total numbers required?
It potentially could, and so there are some implications with that question. Because yeah, it becomes an assembly space that has its own parking load potentially, where if it's accessory, the presumption is that the people that are using it are using the off-street parking that's already there and available for the residents. We're not having any duplicative or additional parking required.
And so what's the total square footage of that new facility currently?
We would have to look into it deeper to figure out what the off-street parking would be if
Okay.
that were the case, because what you're doing is you're getting into not just planning and zoning implications, but you're getting into building code implications, because all structures have an occupant load and it's based on their use. And typically, when you're dealing with a swimming pool or a recreational facility or like a weight room, things of that nature, you have a type of assembly space, and those can have hefty occupant loads depending on how they're designed. So that's a vague answer to your question, but there's just more information and more work that need to be done in order to make that determination.
Okay. And then next question would be, and then has the fire department had opportunity to look at the emergency access off of Brookwood Lane?
Yes, it's in close proximity. The biggest thing there is to make sure that the surface would have to be a compressed all-weather material that can sustain 75,000 pounds, which you get enough rock, you can do that. So.
Right.
And I have a follow-up question on that too, Dustin. So would the nature of that road, the extension of Brookwood there, would that still be used for hike-bike purposes as well as emergency access?
Yeah, so the path that is currently there, I believe, is what we call screening. I haven't actually been out there to see that particular piece of property, but I believe that's a screening path, which is similar to what we have on our levee for those recreational trails. We do that in temporary instances where we know that it's eventually it will be replaced with something more permanent. And the purpose of that is, again, to provide walking access for the residents or the children over here on Prairie Lane and Quail Hollow to get to school. And so at that point in time, once you get to the point where you have development on the north side and Brookwood Lane is carried all the way through, what you'll have is you'll have a sidewalk on the north side of Brookwood to tie into the existing sidewalk, and that temporary path will no longer be necessary.
Thank you.
Hey, Dustin, one quick question. You mentioned the internal private street name for the correction of Horizon to Northview Circle. Is there not already a street there from what I saw on the overhead view?
So I don't think that there has been an identified name for this specific stretch here, which is what we're talking about.
Right.
And I think that will need to be added, unless you're looking at a different photo than I am.
No, that's what I was talking about.
Okay.
So what you don't want is to have people come in on Horizon Drive and then be looking for Northview Circle and they can't find it because there's no street sign, no street name where you're supposed to turn right there. So there needs to be, either that needs to be a long extension of Northview Circle coming from there, or it just needs to have its own street name so that you come in and whether you're making deliveries or responding to a 911 call, that you know you're on Horizon Drive, you need to turn right on something, and there's no something there identified to turn on, and then you get to Northview Circle. So we can't have a gap with no name between Horizon Drive and Northview Circle.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, can we hear from the applicant? And please state your name and address, so the intern doesn't have to go back through the...
Justin Owens with Call Valley Engineering, 2928 Jack Circle. As you can imagine, this is a big project. There's a lot of people involved. We've got Chris, who's representing Presbyterian Manor here. We've also have Justin Noel, who's with Greystone, and they're kind of overseeing the entire project. They actually hired Call Valley, to do the civil. And then we also have AG Architects online as well with Mike Miller. So I may not be able to answer all the questions, but hopefully between all of us, we'll be able to get them all answered. Basically, we're looking at doing this in two main phases. Our first phase would be to do the cottages first, and then, or at least go to construction with the cottages first, and then we're working on plans now to do the wellness facility in addition there. And try and answer some of the questions that came up before I got up here. So we showed the largest villa of all the villas that we had of the four options. What we would like to do is kind of allow people, and correct me if I'm wrong, anybody online or Chris, but my understanding is allow people to purchase whatever one of the four versions and be able to put it where I'm not sure how we'll decide the locations, but there's no way for us to right now decide which villa is going to go in each individual spot. We'd like to be able to leave that open so that we can, you know, if there's one villa that's more popular than the others, and allow options in that way. That's one thing we'd like to be able to do. And then you had a question about the rectangle there in the southeast corner. That is it's the other, well, I'll address that one too, but that one first, it's a pickleball court, or have a proposed pickleball court is what's going in there. And then as far as on the, I guess, yeah, the southeast, I said that wrong, so that was the southwest. Southeast, that I believe is a maintenance building. I don't know the details on that exactly, so if anybody online wants to add to that, please do.
This is Mike Miller with AG Architecture. We could add to that a little bit. So the maintenance building, there's an existing maintenance garage that is in the bottom of that center court there of the new villas. And it's really just general maintenance storage of general stuff. And to replace that and be able to put the new center court and the villa plan in there, we're relocating to that location. Just a freestanding, standing one story. It's really another garage is what it would be.
I guess, other than that, I guess I'd open up to your questions.
Dustin, with what Justin just shared about the layout that you had up there with the cottages, and what they've shown is the maximum, the biggest dwelling size.
Right.
Could they, for number 1 and 2 on page 7, I mean, would that be acceptable for now, to get that approved, or do you have to have more refined?
I think something that might help is if we're going to use the largest footprint as a placeholder, staff would still need to have setback requirements.
Okay.
So the Plan Development District would still have a requirement that the unit be 20 feet back or 30 feet back from the private road, that there be 15 feet or 20 feet, whatever the case may be, between the units and things like that, and that the plan that's being submitted would confirm that even if you used all of the largest units, that you'd still maintain those setbacks. And so having that information, I think, would still be really helpful.
Okay.
Because then if we know that the biggest units met all of the criteria and that the plan showed that whatever criteria you adopt is being met, then when we go to issue the building permit, we can confirm that, hey, this has a 15-foot setback. When they give us the plan shows that setback between the two structures. Or if there's a 25-foot setback on the rear, that we can confirm that. We just have to have quantifiable measurables that we can administer when we go to the building permit of some kind. So that's prescribed by the plan that we can follow out and carry out with the building permit.
So right now, all these footprints that we're seeing are conceptual, and they're just floating out there. They're not tied to anything. There's nothing that ties the four corners of the units to any point behind them, in front of them, beside them.
So these aren't individual lots per se?
Well, that's one of my questions. I mean, Dustin has his list of questions. I have a supplemental list to that. All the units in the previous phases were duplexes. So one question I have is whether, regardless of footprint, whether all these cottages are single living units. We don't know what the dwelling footprint is, even if we assume that they're all the largest unit. We don't know what that, I can't tell you if it's 1,500 square feet, 1,400 square feet, 2,000 square feet. We don't have that information. We don't know what the proposed building setbacks are. one question I have is whether there's any ownership that is envisioned being transferred, or whether these are all going to be owned by Presbyterian Manor and leased in some fashion. I have a question about whether there's any lot area that goes with the cottages, or whether there's just the footprint of the cottage and everything else is common area. And while we may know that the overall site coverage is not going to exceed 11%, we don't know what if you added up the 29 footprints of the 29 units that we don't know, and you divide that by the area of Phase 5, that would tell us what the density and the lot coverage is, and we can't answer either of those questions because we don't know how big Phase 5 is, and we don't know how big the footprint is of those largest units. So the concern we have is not with the concept, the concern is with the lack of detail, because we don't know how we would do a building permit review, because we don't have any parameters to say, okay, this is properly located, or it's not too big, or this is where this unit's supposed to go, or there's 4,000 square feet of land area that goes with this unit and it's 1,500 square feet. We don't know any of those things.
So is there anybody that can provide any clarification to those questions?
Yeah, if I could speak to that a little bit.
And if you can
it's like-
identify again, sorry.
Again, sure, this is Mike Miller with AG Architecture. And it appears we're lacking some dimensions, as you indicated there with the spacing. So generally, just the idea of how we place these on there is we did use the biggest footprint, compared each one, and what's that boundary. Generally, we're trying to maintain a minimum of 20 feet between dwellings. I think our minimum is 16. Justin, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it was 16 was the minimum kind of typical setback.
We did show on our PDDs some minimums, dimensions. I don't know if you can pull that up. I believe the zoomed-in version of it did have, I mean, it's very difficult to see, as there's a lot of information we were trying to show there, but we showed some minimum separations where our minimum was, and some of our minimum setback off of the back of the curb of the road.
Yeah, so generally keeping that spacing between with the largest footprint, and the reason we use this one, it's very similar in footprint size to the C plan, but this has a side entry concept, which kind of creates that sidewalk on the side. So again, from a left to right, as you're looking at the villa, it's the largest width, and then also on the front to back's coverage, I guess. So we did use that concept to have minimums, and just as you've described, I think we should have probably provided, there's a couple there, 30-foot minimum at the driveway I see on the plan. And then I don't see a lot of dimensions between them, which is obvious as to why you're asking the question.
I think I see one there that has a 13-foot minimum. And so one of the advantages of a planned development district is that it provides some flexibility to, we're standard R2 standards, which have rather rigid setback requirements. And so what we're trying to get at is this is designed for flexibility, but we don't know what areas that we might need to be flexible with in terms of setbacks or any of those things. Another question that's not clear is in most of our developments with private streets, there's a nominal right-of-way area that's behind the curb line that's not part of anybody's building lot for laying utilities or having mailboxes or other things, and we can't tell whether the curb line is the right-of-way line or property line for setback purposes, or whether there's an area, in other words, we can't tell what the width of Northview Circle is, whether we're supposed to be measuring the front setback from the curb line or from some other line. And that goes to our question of whether there's any lot area that goes with the footprint, or if it's just the footprint and then everything else is common area for Presbyterian Manor.
Yeah, and this is Justin now with Greystone Communities. We're the development consultant for PMMA. In terms of ownership, there's no fee simple transfer of ownership. It's all owned and will continue to be owned by Presbyterian Manors. So I guess in terms of the common area, that would remain with Presbyterian Manors. It's not transferred to the resident.
So if they're leasing something, they're leasing a unit, and does that include driveways and patios, or is it just the footprint, or what? If I'm a prospective resident of one of these cottages and I sign a rental or lease agreement, what am I leasing? Am I leasing the four walls? Am I leasing a driveway? Am I leasing patio, sidewalk?
Yeah, and it's an entry fee based product with a monthly service fee. So I would have to go back and I don't know, Christian, if you can speak to that as far as how the resident contracts read in the existing townhouses. As far as what the contracts cover in terms of the resident area.
And we would need you to come up to the podium, please. State your name and address.
In my experience, most of our townhome type developments that are private like this, they have a set of documents or covenants that's defined what the dwelling unit is, and in many cases, the dwelling unit consists of the four walls plus a patio plus driveway. Those are considered parts of the dwelling unit, and then the rest of the area is defined as common area. So I didn't know how that was going to be structured in terms of what the resident is actually going with their residence.
My name is Christian Gilbert, 2601 East Crawford Street. Is that okay for my address? Okay, good deal. So typically, the dwelling is going to consist of the unit itself, the driveway, and then there is a patio area of our current units that the residents take on as part of their lease with us.
And it is a lease, it's not a purchase?
It's an entry fee process, as he was mentioning, so, and then you have a monthly service fee that you pay to accommodate the services that we offer while you live with us, so.
But you're going to allow the first-time individual into that to make the decision of which of those villas they're going to be going into?
Correct. So there's multiple options, and then as we build, they get to choose their floor plan.
Okay.
I think the follow-up question would be, is there a certain number of each type of villa that you plan on building? Or are you giving them an option of, we have 3 A's and 2 B's, or is it just the Wild West of you can choose whatever you want?
Well, I believe we're still in the planning process of that, or the conversations, but I do know that there's 4 options, and they'll get to pick between those 4 options. So I don't think there's a set number, like we're only going to offer a set number of 4, and once those are chosen, you have to choose the other options. But again, I think we're still in conversation for that.
Then I think part of that goes back into kind of the setbacks that we were talking about and the minimum setbacks, because at least in a couple of these, it looks like, depending on what that setback ends up being, that you're going to be limited to on this section, and whatever the dimensions are of that, you may not be able to do A, and you can only do B, C, or D based on the size and the setback part of it.
Sure.
I'm going to throw a question out there for staff. Are you guys comfortable with this? It seems like there's a lot of ambiguous statements here. And how would we move this forward with the information that we have?
Well, really, it's more of a function for the level of comfort with the commission and how comfortable you are with delegation to us. What the meetings that we've had to date, all the focus has been on the concept, and what you are hearing today is the concept, and it lacks a lot of detail. And because it lacks a lot of detail, and because Caw Valley's trying to show so much information on one drawing, including contours and drainage and water lines and all those things, what we're lacking is detail. But I guess if we could get some idea of what the footprint is of these cottages, then we would at least have some idea of what our upper limit is, and knowing what we're at for site coverage and those kinds of things. The other things, I think, are more directed towards Caw Valley and that we haven't really addressed, and that deals with where the post-development runoff is being directed. I think that would be something the Planning Commission would want to know before acting, and the proposed design and the purpose of the access road connecting to Brookwood Lane. In other words, is it going to be multi-purpose? Are there going to be deliveries or anyone else using that? Or is it going to be gated and with a Knox box for the fire department, that type of thing? Those are the kinds of details that we're lacking. And so if we could get some of those pinned down, then I think some of the things about, because this goes back to Dustin's point that this is a planned development district, and it has a 1977 ordinance, and it has a 1977 ordinance that provides no standards, parameters, or anything as to what development is going to take place. And the other thing that the ordinance had is a 11-year deadline for developing this campus, and it didn't get developed by 1988. So the ordinance is obsolete. It needs to be updated and replaced. It would be easier if we just had some parameters. So I'm going to ask Mr. Hers to read through the development standards for R2, and then part of the question is whether, as designed, these set of cottages meets those, or whether we're needing to vary something that's in there. So if you could go over that, please, Dustin.
Sure, give me a moment. I'll get that all pulled up.
Well, I don't know that we need to pull it up, but you have it from another report that was given to you that has what those basic standards are.
Okay. Wow.
If not, I can go get that and bring it here, and we can
I'll
read
pull
them.
it
I mean, I
up on
have
the
them.
screen. As fast as the internet will take us, I'll get us there.
Can I ask another question while you're looking for that, Dustin?
Sure.
And this is for the developers. When do you plan on turning a shovel of dirt here? Do you have a time in mind?
Yeah, there'll be a sales process involved with the cottages, but we're looking at if we can get entitlements and permits by the fall.
It's pretty ambitious.
So this is the R2 district regulations that has the permitted uses, conditional uses, and then also the lot requirements and the bulk regulations. And the bulk regulations are really probably, in terms of all the development standards that we've been talking about, where we're struggling the most, because those bulk regulations are the criteria that establish the geographic relationship between the proposed units and other site improvements. And so we have structure heights, maximums of 35 feet, which all of the units are proposed are single family. They're going to be much less than the 35-foot maximum. You have 25-foot front yard setback requirements. You have 7.5 feet side yard requirements, which if you have two units next to each other, that comes up to 15 feet in between them. And so that's something that we would need to talk about. And then you also have a 25-foot rear yard setback requirement. And the tricky part when you have a planned development like this specifically is that you don't have a lot of those lot lines or reference points or zoning lots, dimensions or boundaries to work from like you do on a single family or regular two-family type of development, because you have a campus that has a lot of these units kind of, as Dean said, floating around inside there. And so having at least parameters for the reference points that we do have, such as the east property line, north property line, the proposed street, the relationship of dwelling A to dwelling B for your side yard setbacks, things like that would help us.
So since it is a PPD, we can set the minimum requirements that of the R2, the 25-foot setback in the front, 25 in the back.
Correct.
7.5 on the side. We can set that minimum requirement
Correct.
for all of these units going into it.
Normally, what would happen is that we would have that for you, and we would review this and say, we've reviewed this, and the applicant is requesting a 20-foot front setback instead of 25, and we would report that to you. It's just we can't report that to you because we don't know if they are, if it's a 30-foot setback, a 25-foot setback, 20-foot setback, if all of them are set back a minimum of 25 feet, and then you have the separation between them, and then you have, like, on the units on the east side that have a property line to the east, we can measure that. We can measure a setback from those units from the east property line, but if you take the units in the center, we don't know what point to measure that from, or if the sidewalk is the measuring point and every unit's going to be 10 feet from the proposed sidewalk. We just don't know those things. And so that's the challenge. You could approve this, and you'd approve it subject to all the cottages meeting the R2 development standards, and then as we get into more detail, we find out they in fact don't or can't, and then we're coming back. So the really is, Mr. or Commissioner Mike Sell observed what our comfort level is. Our comfort level is only to approve this subject to the R2 development standards that Dustin just gave for you, and then every one of their units is going to have to conform with that, and if it doesn't, then it'll have to come back.
Well, personally, my comfort level with you guys administering this is fine. You know, if we say it's going to be that, I'm okay with it. And you know, they're talking about turning over dirt in the fall. I think that's pretty ambitious, and probably requires us to make some decision at this level.
Right. And I would say, I mean, I think that the general idea of the cottages and the wellness center is fine, but without having enough detail of exactly how big they are, where they're going to sit, I mean, I definitely agree with the runoff, because it seems like we constantly have issues with, okay, where's it being ran off to? Especially if the fact that if we're looking in the northeast corner now, that there's a situation with the existing homes that are to the east of it, if there's issues with water being directed to that area and it become a lock point, we add additional areas into it, then it's going to be increasing that. So are we running it that way, or are we running it back to the west? That hasn't been addressed, so I think there's a lot of information that we need in order to approve this at this point in time. But as a general concept, I think that's a good idea.
Well, we would like Mr. Owens to confirm whether we're interpreting that plan correctly, but as we interpret the drainage plan, it's not to send the water to here, but to send it to here. And the concern, and I'm in dialogue right now with the owners and the farmer who has this, but the farmer who is farming that has seen fit to grade the channel over and basically has created a dam right here when this is supposed to be a channel going across. And so the water that comes down through here, stops here, backs up into these yards, and then staff gets phone calls from those people wondering if that's the way it's supposed to work, and it's not supposed to work that way. It's supposed to flow on to the north and get under Holmes Road, but that was our interpretation of what the plan was, but we were requesting that be confirmed at today's meeting.
Do we have an answer to that today?
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty far along. We've got nearly final plans, so we know what's going on. I mean, and to say, I don't necessarily agree with saying there's a lack of detail, because if anything, there's so much detail it's hard to read, because if you look at the checklist for everything that they want put on this thing, we tried our best to show it, and contours are included. It's on the checklist. Trying to show all the dimensions that you've talked about would be almost impossible. We tried to show the minimums. That is the minimums we're asking for, and that's what it's on there. If it's a matter of trying to clarify things, put it in a table, I mean, we can put it in a table, but it is there, and we know we've got a good solid plan of what we plan on doing. We feel confident it's going to work. I can address, these questions on the runoff and all that. I don't know, Dustin, if you could bring up the zoomed in or the second page of the PDD.
This
Do you have
one?
a pointer or something that I can use?
Dean, I think, might.
So essentially, the site is divided pretty much the way it is now. There's really a high that runs down the middle of it existing. So right now, this western half drains down here to the existing stream and the structures underneath the road here. Everything on this eastern half winds up getting into this concrete line ditch as it is now. Essentially, we're sticking with that basic drainage pattern. We did, we had a DRT on this project about a year ago. We talked with staff. Detention was brought up. We've got a very large pond here. I requested that if they had any drainage reports on was there any detention intended for this originally? It was, all planned out in 1977, prior to detention being required. We really the staff was not able to find anything necessarily on this pond as far as it being sized, but it does provide detention for the site. We were not at that time instructed that we were going to have to provide detention, that because nothing was designed originally with detention, that we weren't going to be held to having to provide detention for this. And because of that, we tried to stick with the existing drainage patterns. I'm not, I'm not up on speed on what issues there may be having here. We are tying everything into the concrete line ditch, so it will get to that point. If there's issues now, it's all outside of our property. It's kind of out of our control. I don't know what we can do about it if it's outside of our if this is a drainage easement, that's really not our responsibility to have to maintain that. That should be on the city. So if there's issues that are outside of our property, I don't know what we can do about that. Of course, we don't want to make things worse. We want to work with people to try to solve that problem all we can. So we'd be willing to work with you on that. What was the other question? As far as the access road coming in, plan is for that is to be strictly for emergency access only. It will be paved with gravel for the minimum 20-foot width, be able to sustain, I believe it's 75,000-pound load. There will be an emergency gate with a Knox box to only allow emergency vehicles. And, we will pretty much be adding more gravel. We make sure that we're going to get this existing trail tied back in. The grades will work. We'll actually have to replace part of it just to make it all work and get everything to work on that. Is there any other questions? I mean, we try to show as much as we can on this, but, we're kind of limited. We do have plans, if that would help. I'm sure staff's going to have to review that. The questions as far as right-of-way, we did not show any right-of-way. We didn't plan to have any designated right-of-way, and we would have a minimum setback off the back of curb to the front of the houses, which we showed that as being 30 feet. We plan for the water line to be within a public easement so that it can be maintained, because that will be the only public utility on site. The rest of it, the water, everything else will all be private, and the responsibility of the owners maintain. So we didn't see the need in designating any kind of right-of-way for that.
What about the parking spaces down by the wellness center? The ones you're going to take out and then what you're adding?
I don't have an exact number of how much we could provide that information of how much will be coming out. I'm pretty sure we'll be adding more than what will be coming out. And I guess that there was a question of whether that would be just for the use of the residents, and I can't speak to that exactly, but I believe it's only for the residents. I don't know if, yeah. So
Correct.
Plan for that to be a public facility.
So it's strictly for, now, so residents and staff, I'm assuming? So everything's already accounted for parking for anybody that would be using it? Okay.
And if it did change, you'd bring it back and add more spaces if it did go public?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And then what about naming the street up there? Any issues there?
We did have conversation with the owner on that. I believe, and he's not here today, but they wanted to be able to maybe name this Horizon Drive all the way around, and then, Northview. I guess what Dean suggested, having Northview extend down would also be a possibility, so I guess whatever's for best clarity. We did discuss coming up with a completely different name. I don't know that was really desirable. It's either going to be Horizon, and I guess, they would probably entertain the idea of having Northview.
Does Horizon Drive continue up to the west through there?
It does, so Horizon Drive's not really a workable solution for that leg going to the northeast, because Horizon Drive goes to the northwest and could possibly continue.
Right, through that area. So, and you said that they could extend for what the new one's going to be and then bring it down and back around both ways, all the way back over to Horizon Drive?
Well, ideally, that loop around would have a name, but there needs to be some connection. There needs to be an intersection that can be identified where vehicles, there's a gap between Northview Circle and the rest of the private street system. And so there's no way for anybody coming in from the south to know where Northview Circle is because there's no connection there. If it was only coming from Brookwood, that would be fine, but there needs to be some, you come in Horizon Drive, you turn right on something, it has to have a name to connect to Northview Circle.
That would make Google happy.
So I guess from our standpoint in terms of postponement versus action, if we can get, it's been told to us that the information that we can't find or find lacking is there for us to see, and we just can't see it. So if it could be put into the record what the maximum footprint it is that the commission is being asked to approve for the cottages, and what the minimum setback requirement's going to be for all the cottages, and what the minimum side yard's going to be for all the cottages, and what the minimum rear yard setback is going to be for all the cottages, so that we have those parameters, because at some point in time, they're going to be applying for building permits, and we can't review building permits unless we know what the parameters are for the construction.
Surely somebody has the maximum square footage of the
Yeah,
biggest
we've got, I mean, I'm sure Mike can
yeah.
provide that.
What is?
I can go right down the line of the 4 units just to give you an idea of the square footage we're talking about. And there's 2 numbers associated. One is the living area and one is the overall footprint, including the garage.
Just a second.
So
I'm sorry. So Dean, which one is important to you?
It's the amount that's covered by roof. So we consider the garage to be part of the footprint.
Okay.
yes.
Have you got those numbers?
So that varies from the smallest at 1,924 square feet up to 2,426 square feet.
So we're being asked to assume that everyone could be the largest, the 2,426 square feet.
Correct. And as you indicated, we've used those R2 requirements as far as, like I said, that was the intention of how we laid this out here. I see on the one plan that 13 feet. That's closer than we want that one to be, as I see it on that plan there. But the intent was to be a minimum of 16 feet with the largest footprint between homes, and then actually trying to maintain 20 feet on most of them. So I think generally how we had laid that out, it was to be 16-foot minimum between any of the villas. And that would fall right in with the R2 requirements like you're saying. That's what we tried to use as we laid this out on here for all those setbacks and all that. And even though they're not individual lots, they're pads on overall property. They're not individual parcels and owned by those residents. So, but we still wanted to use those parameters, and that is what our intention was with how we laid it out. And I see there's, like I said, that one was a little close as it was mentioned on there.
So if we set forth a motion that used R2 guidelines and 2426 as the max square footage, is that something you guys could work with and work with the applicant on
Yes.
getting nailed down?
Mm-hmm. So we'd be looking at 2 actions this afternoon. One would be a motion on the amended final development plan for Phase 5, and that would be, if it were approved this afternoon, that would be an amended plan that would be subject to the development standards of the R2 district as to setback and lot coverage with a maximum footprint of 2,426 square feet for any individual unit. And that would establish the parameters so that when building permit plans were submitted, we would compare the building permits with those parameters. And if they didn't match, then they'd have to modify accordingly.
Can I ask one question in regard to that, to clarify on that area? That is the enclosed area of the livable area and the garage. If we have the back patio on some, as you see, there's a covered patio on some of those, does that
If there
need
is
to be
a
in
covered
that?
patio, that would count. So if there's something that could be factored in as to what the covered patio, if there's any kind of standard dimension that could be added to the 24, 26. But yes, if it's a covered patio, it would be considered part of the dwelling footprint.
Yep, and I've actually got that number as well. 2602 is the largest if you include that patio space or the entry stoop type, which is a covered area as well.
So that would make the maximum footprint up to 2,602 square feet of building area.
Thank you.
So we would need a motion to do the maximum area of the 2602 with the R2.
Okay.
We still need something on the street naming part of it to be able to tie in from, or we still need information on a street name to tie in from Horizon Drive to the other one.
Yes, I mean, you can have,
Make that be part of the motion.
you can have a condition that before their development plan is considered final, that they'll have to add a street name for the segment between Horizon Drive and Northview Circle. That could be a condition of approval along with those parameters.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I think I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay. Before you do, is there any other discussion from?
Yeah,
Check with the public here as well.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I have, like staff, there are so many questions on here, and I almost think it's more beneficial to us as a commission to get some answers in place and get some clarity in place before we move forward with this. And if that includes postponing it for 2 weeks, I think that would give us more clarity moving forward. As far as street names, as far as, the drainage, as far as the dimensions and so forth, I get the R2, the setbacks and everything, and I think they can work all of that out. It's difficult with the floating, as Dean called it, but I'm more in favor of just postponing it, getting some more clarity as to where we're going with it.
Well, and I think at this point, then, what it ends up being, one, we've got to bring it back to the public, but we can always make a motion, and if enough people feel that way, then it can be denied, and then we can make another motion. But before we get to the point of a motion, Dustin, is there anybody online for the public?
Is there anyone online who would like to speak with any questions, concerns, or thoughts?
Okay. If
Doesn't
not,
appear so.
any other comments from the public? Okay, if not, then we're going to close public comment, and then we're going to bring it up to a motion at this point in time.
Well, having ultimate faith in the planning department, I would like to make a motion that we approve application PDD 86-2E for Phase 5 development of Presbyterian Manor with guideline to follow R2 guidelines and add the maximum square footage of a footprint of a building at 2,602 square feet. Am I missing anything else there, Dean?
Probably something about amending the plan to add a street name.
Yes, and amending the plan to add a street name, and then I'll also review the ordinance by
Well,
staff.
we're going to ask the ordinance be addressed in a separate motion.
Okay.
So, this is just an motion on the amended development plan.
Okay.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, so we have a motion and second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay.
Nay.
Okay, so motion carried 4-1.
Okay, my recommendation is by a separate motion that the planning commission recommend to the City Commission approval of an amended PDD ordinance that establishes the development standards for the Presbyterian Manor campus and eliminates the 11-year deadline for completion, because there's still an ordinance that says this campus must be completely developed in 11 years, and they have not met that deadline, and it really needs to be removed. So if our recommendation is that you approve a motion that recommends to the City Commission approval of an amended PDD ordinance that establishes the development standards for the Presbyterian Manor campus and eliminates the 11-year deadline for campus development.
Do we have a motion?
Carla looks like she's all over it.
Whatever Dean just said, is that acceptable?
So we have a motion. Do
You
we have a
can
second?
cite what I read there, if
I
if you're
cite
in
what
agreement.
Dean just said.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, carries 5-0.
Commissioner Meichel, you seconded that motion?
I did.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that should take care of application PDD 86-2E, which now takes us to application PDD 81-4Q filed by New Potato Holding Company, LLC.
Mr. Hers also worked on this report, so he'll introduce it and the background, and then explain the nature of the project, and I'll be available to chime in.
So this is another Plan Development District amendment that also has a requested rezoning tied to it. So the background of the property is the development of the Central Mall, which was originally, the plan was originally approved in 1982 and then amended in 1986 with the actual mall being constructed shortly thereafter. There are a number of outlots. There's 8 outlots along the west side of the Central Mall that are all zoned PC3, which is our planned shopping center district zoning classification. And then there's also a number of 4 office outlots on the south side along Magnolia, with one of those lots being reviewed by you for rezoning for a hotel recently that has not come to fruition at this point in time. So the applicant is New Potato Holding Company, LLC, and they have a contract to purchase what is formerly known as the Kansas Buffet or the Coyote Canyon restaurant before that. And so that is the building structure, the parking lot, and everything within the yellow, orangish lines that you see. So this is our subject property that we will be discussing. Currently, the property is zoned PC or PDD C3, and that PDD C3 district allows for restaurants, a lot of different types of retail, mainly retail activities that are taking place inside of a structure, but it does not permit car washes. And what the applicant is interested in, as they own and operate car washes, is redeveloping the site, removing the existing building and all of the existing site improvements, and reconstructing the site with a car wash. So this is the existing site plan showing the restaurant with all of the parking stalls on the site. The existing restaurant is a little over 9,000 square feet, and there are 133 off-street parking spaces with the current restaurant. And what the applicant is proposing is a car wash that is automated and would have a north-south orientation, as well as 39 off-street parking spaces that would have vacuum apparatus connected to them, as well as canopies that cover a majority of those parking spaces. So the applicant in this case is PA Group, which is the project designer for the proposed tidal wave auto spa, and they are joining us via Zoom, and so they will be available for questions when we get through our staff report. Because this particular application involves both a requested rezoning going from a planned development district C3 to a planned development district C5, we have two elements. We have one, the rezoning piece, and then we also have the final development plan review. So the rezoning piece is the proposed rezoning of C5 versus the existing C3, appropriate and suitable for the area. And then the site development piece is similar to what we just went through, where we're looking at the regulations within the C5 district and whether or not the proposed plan would adhere to those or fit within the confines of those development standards. So the intent of the C5 district is similar to what we would see with the C3 district. The main difference is that your C5 districts are going to be more oriented towards motorist and highway traffic, and so you see some of it along South 9th Street, particularly in this area actually, on the west side of the street. So I'll pull up a zoning map here, and you can see that from Otto all the way down to Magnolia on the west side, we have C5 zoning, where on the east side of South 9th Street, we have the Central Mall and the outlots, which are PDD C3, with the exception of the C5 zoning, which is directly south of the subject property. So the subject property is where I have my cursor here, and you'll see that to the north and to the east, we have PDD C3, and then to the west and to the south, we have C5. So we do have some C5 zoning adjacent and within the area of the proposed car wash. On page 4 and 5, we do have, of your staff report, we do have the bulk regulations and development standards for C5 that could be reviewed, and what planning staff will summarize them by saying that when we look at the site plan that's proposed, the site does, or the plan rather, does meet all of the zoning requirements for the C5 district. The most notable difference that we have with C5 from C3 is that we have additional uses that the C3 district doesn't have, primarily that of things like automobile dealerships, and in this case also car washes. And a lot of those uses are tied towards outdoor display or sales of some type. And so that's one of the primary differences that you'll see between C5 and C3 is an expansion and intensification of uses, as well as outdoor storage and display being allowed in the C5 district where it is not allowed in the C3 district. Because this is a planned development district, you are also tasked as a board and commission to review the proposed elevation drawings that are submitted, reviewing the materials, reviewing the design, the color, things of that nature, the general aesthetics of the proposed structures. Building design is usually not part of our zoning ordinance. The exception is in the South 9th Overlay District, the North Ohio Overlay District, and then in planned development districts, which is what we're dealing with in this particular case. When you look at the suitability of the site for development under the existing zoning, the property has been zoned PDD C3 since it was originally developed and historically been used as a restaurant. And so the applicant believes that even though it's been used successfully as a restaurant in the past, the property itself is more suitable for intensification to C5 zoning district, particularly so that a car wash could be located at this site, which they feel is appropriate given the traffic nature and the number of vehicles that travel along the South 9th corridor in this area. The question for the Planning Commission in this case is whether the tract that is being requested for rezoning is more suitable for C5 or if the existing C3 is suitable. I think when staff looks at this, it's really a matter of they both fit. I mean, restaurants and retail are the general spirit of the C3 district, which is really what you see in this particular area in this corridor. All of the surrounding properties, if you look to the north or to the south, are restaurants that are directly adjacent to this property. And what you'll find is restaurants and general retail throughout this area, which the C3 and the C5 both work, and they both fit, and they're both appropriate. It's a matter of whether or not the intensification from a C3 to a C5 district is appropriate or more suitable. And again, the primary difference is your C5 district is going to allow different uses that may or may not be appropriate, such as automobile dealerships or in this case, the proposed car wash. So given that there is a long history of the site being suitable for C3 and its function as a restaurant, staff would ask the applicant to clarify how they believe the proposed PDD C5 zoning is more suitable than the existing PDD C3 district. Looking at the character of the neighborhood, the South 9th corridor is one of our main commercial corridors, as you know, as a planning commission, and there's a mixture of C3 and C5 zoning, and both the PDD C3 and the PDD C5 would fit within that. It's a matter of whether or not the proposed car wash and other uses that may come along with the proposed PC5 are appropriate for this site and the existing neighborhood. So that would be a distinction and analysis that the board would have to make and make a decision on. Is not so much the general retail or restaurant, but the additional uses that a C5 district might allow, and whether or not those uses, particularly again the car wash, would be appropriate for the area. In looking at public utilities, storm drainage, and service, because this is a redevelopment site, we do have adequate utilities and services for the site. There's an existing 12-inch line, water line that is, on the west side of South 9th Street. There's an 8-inch private sanitary sewer line that runs around the ring road of Central Mall. There's a ring road that everyone's aware of that's private that serves all of the development in the planned development district in the Central Mall PDD. And there's also a subdivision pond for stormwater detention in the northeast corner of the site that water is directed towards. So the development shouldn't have any problems or any shortage of utilities that are necessary for the proposed use. In conformance with the Central Mall's concept and comprehensive plan, the future land use map for this area has this shown as commercial, which there are two major corridors that the comprehensive plan shows as future commercial, and this happens to be one of them. So one is North 9th Street and Interstate 70, and the other is the 9th Street corridor around the Magnolia Interchange, which is where we're located. So that takes us to the actual review of the amended final development plan and what is being proposed by the developer. And in this case, we have a lot that is part of a lot split that was done, and that lot split created the kiosk and Jiffy Lube on a separate lot, and the kiosk being the tropical snow place that you're familiar with. So those are on a separate zoning lot from what the applicant is proposing to purchase and redevelop. The street access for the site would remain largely unchanged from what we have today. If you were to go out to the former Kansas Buffet, you would enter the access road that is on the north side of the property that accesses the Central Mall from 9th Street, and there is a existing curb cut, and there's also a curb cut along the ring road to the east. So if you go to the aerial photo, you can see that there's a break in the median on the access road that accesses the Central Mall. It would be lined up exactly where it is today, and there's also a access point off the ring road for Central Mall that would also be retained and reused. So there is sufficient access for the site. 9th Street between Otto and Magnolia carries almost 20,000 vehicles per day, but we don't see this particular development having any negative impacts on that existing traffic pattern because of the way that the property is accessed from the private drives to the north and east. There is no access off of Century Plaza Drive, which is the private road that runs to the west of the property. So really what we're looking at is maintaining the existing traffic pattern for the site. Building orientation, the building that is being proposed has a north-south orientation, and we do have elevation drawings that show what the exterior of that building looks like. So if you're looking at the property from 9th Street, you're going to notice that the majority of the front surface of the elevation of the building is going to be primarily glass, and you'll see that on the north and south sides that there is what appears to be a masonry block. I'm not sure if it's stone, tile, or a CMU. That's something that we'll have the applicant clarify. And above the CMU, when you have on the north and south sides where you enter and exit, you'll have some masonry stone with overhead doors that are arched, and then you also have a combination of ephes, which is a stucco type of surface product. It's not exactly stucco, but it's an insulated form of stucco, and that combined with a masonry stone and then a cap on the wainscoting that you have for that, either that CMU block or smooth surface stone of some type, or brick that's being identified along the bottom. So that would be true on the south elevation where you enter. It would be true on the north elevation that you exit, which I'll try to get, that moved way more. So this would be the exit, and then it's true also for the east elevation. So this would be the back side or the side that would face the parking lot where you have all of the vacuum stalls, and so you have a combination of glass frontage there, ephes, masonry stone, and then whatever this block is, and then you have what looks like a blue corrugated roof of some type of metal. And so that would be the actual car wash itself. Then there are two vacuum buildings. So what is being proposed is, in order to cut down sound as well as to increase longevity of the vacuuming equipment, they're actually proposing buildings to house the vacuum equipment, and that those buildings are going to be similar in style, where you have the wainscoting that is capped with the ephes and the same blue roofs, and then you also have the canopies that cover the vacuum areas, and that's what we're looking at here. We got pay stations as well as canopies that are covering the vacuum stations. So those are some elevation drawings of the structures and the building orientation. The actual building itself, the buildings themselves all meet or exceed the minimum setbacks. And then that takes us to the off-street parking. So for automated car washes, the zoning code requires that there be 6 stacking spaces, and the plans as proposed, if you look closely, you'll see kind of these ghosted gray outlines of vehicles are showing 10 parking spaces, which exceeds that amount, and staff would note that you can probably at least double it and get at least 20, because with the two stacking lanes, you have a tremendous amount of stacking area as you enter the site. So stacking and off-street parking shouldn't be a problem. There are 3 off-street parking spaces for employees that are just parking spaces that don't have any vacuum connections associated with them. There's also 2 handicap accessible parking spaces, and then all of the balance parking spaces are covered canopy parking stalls that have vacuum access. Loading, unloading, the zoning code does require one 10-foot by 25-foot loading, unloading zone for supplies being brought onto the site. So staff would ask the applicant to show us or indicate the location of where that particular loading, unloading area would take place. We do have a landscape planting plan based on the amount of street frontage that we have, because we do have 3 street frontages. You have a street frontage on the north, you have the Central Mall Ring Road on the east, and then you have Century Plaza Drive on the west. The site is required to have over 12,700 square feet of front yard landscaping area, and that is green space within the front 25 feet of the property. The plan proposes 16,596 square feet, so it does exceed that requirement. That breakdown of 1 tree unit for every 500 square feet of required landscaping also requires the site to have 25 tree units, and that is an area where staff will need to work with the applicant to better understand what plantings are being proposed and confirm that we have enough tree units in the front yard setback area. Specifically, we have a legend on the plans that I'll zoom in on here that has 2 different symbols for front yard trees. Staff doesn't know what those trees are, so we don't know how to identify them as shade trees or ornamental trees or what kind of trees we're dealing with. So we can't tie what we call a tree unit value to them. For instance, a shade tree is worth 1 tree unit, where 3 ornamental trees are worth 1 tree unit. So it really depends on what kind of varieties are being proposed, on how many tree units are being proposed on the plan, and then all of those tree units, in order to count towards the front yard landscaping, would have to be in the front 25 feet of the property. So there are a number of tree units on the east side of the drive coming into the site, as well as some tree units on the south side of the drive, where you have the stacking, that are not located in the front 25 feet, that they would have to ask the Planning Commission's permission to allow them to count towards front yard landscaping, even though they're not in the front 25 feet, or they'd have to amend their plan to make sure that all of their plantings are in the front 25 feet. Staff would note that there is a large area in the primary front yard, which would be the front yard along Century Plaza Drive, that also faces 9th Street, where there is no proposed plantings at all that would need to be addressed and looked at. Well, that takes us to signage, and the C3 district does allow for 4 square feet per lineal foot of building frontage, and the Central Mall PDD limits monument signs or freestanding signs to ground signs of no more than 8 feet in height. So if you were to drive down South 9th Street, you'll notice that all of the restaurants and outlets have lower profile signs, monument signs of no more than 8 feet. And so that would also pertain to this particular property, where the sign would be limited to 8 feet in height, but the total sign area, because you have 310 square feet of building frontage, because of the three different frontages you're dealing with, you would be allowed to have over 1,240 square feet. So the total allowable sign area isn't going to be a problem for the site. Historically, there's been a condition on all the outlots that, again, that their sign is limited to no more than 8 feet for any freestanding signs. So the sign or the site plan review process that we're going through, again, is 2 steps, where 1, you would be looking at taking action on the proposed rezoning going from PC3 to PC5, and then the second action would be a separate motion, and that would be for the review of the amended site development plan. So we do have some findings as to that on page 14. We also have a number of alternatives. The first is that you could approve the proposed C5 rezoning without any modifications, and also approve the proposed site plan as it's submitted. You could approve the proposed PDD C5 rezoning without any modifications and approve the proposed site plan subject to any conditions that, or revisions that you feel is necessary. And 3, you could postpone consideration if you feel additional information is needed, or you could deny the requested rezoning if you feel that the submitted plans or the proposed rezoning are unsuitable for the area. So on page 15, we do have a number of potential conditions that staff has identified. If you feel that the applicant is able to adequately clarify the exterior materials that are being proposed to the Planning Commission's satisfaction, and if you feel that the site and the plans that are being proposed meet all of the criteria. So with that, when staff was going through and looking at the elevation drawings, we made our best interpretation of what the elements were, and so we'd ask the applicant to clarify that we were correct, because we didn't have a legend to work from that we could find. So with that, staff will take any questions that we may have, or if you want to discuss any of the 8 conditions that we've recommended on page 15, we can do that as well.
Dustin, did you want to clarify that our recommendation is that the only C5 is included is car washes?
Oh, that is a good distinction to add. So yeah, that is something that has been done in the past when we talk about a planned development district, is you can craft the ordinance, because that's really what you're dealing with, is a specific ordinance that's going to tie specifically to that property in a way that best fits the character of the neighborhood. And so what Mr. Andrew has suggested is, when in the past, when we've had planned districts where we've increased the intensity and gone from, for example, a C3 to a C5, we've tried to limit the negative impacts that rezoning might have by just limiting it to the C3 district plus the use that's being proposed. So in this case, what that would look like is the site would be limited to the uses permitted in the C3 district plus car washes, and it would basically be C3 plus, if you want to look at it that way.
Questions for staff?
Do you know the hours this will be open, or is it 24 hours?
That would be a good question for the applicant.
And then I assume neighboring businesses have been contacted about this?
Yes, when we do a rezoning, we post a sign, and we also do mailings, and we do notification in the journal for all the public who follows legal notifications in the journal.
And just for my information, has there been any other interest in this building in the last 2 to 3 years?
I can't really speak to that, no.
Okay, that's okay. That's all I have.
Okay. Any other questions? Nope. So I get, my question would be then on page 15 on number 5 for the signage being as allowed in the C3, is that because you're looking at this being a PPD that is basically follows the C3 but with the addition of the C5 for the car wash?
Correct, and if you were to look at all the other outlots that we have around the Central Mall, this is a condition that every single one of those has. So to be consistent with all of the outlots along the 9th Street side particularly, this would be a condition that would carry over and be equal and matching those other limitations that those other outlots have.
Okay. So all of the rest of them are following the same C3?
Correct.
Now, the other question that I have is, can you bring up the map that shows kind of the different areas, the C3 and C5? Because to the south of them, correct, where Chipotle's and Verizon is, that's C5?
Correct, and that's straight C5. So that's not a planned C5, but it's a straight C5. You also have the convenience store that is also south of Century Plaza Drive. That's C5.
So when that was how long has that been zone C5? Or I mean, was that one that when that building went in, that it went in for a zoning change?
No, that, if I remember correctly, when the UMB Bank site, which was here before it was redeveloped,
That was,
that was C5, and so there was no rezoning necessary when that strip center development went in to replace the former UMB Bank.
okay.
I believe that C5 zoning or a predecessor to it, a different, under the prior zoning, that has been zoned commercial longer than the central mall. And so some of that zoning out there was never part of and predates the mall.
Okay.
And so the mall was agricultural at the time that it was proposed as a mall, but that commercial zoning was already there on the corner prior to development of the mall.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for staff? Okay. So comments from the applicant?
Good evening.
Hello? If
Can you
could
hear me
please state
okay?
Yeah, if you could please state your name and address, please.
Sure. Leslie Accardo, 1849 Pond Run, Auburn Hills, Michigan.
Okay. So any comments from what the staff has reported?
Just a couple things. This is not a 24-hour operation, so they have regular business hours. I don't know exactly what they are, but they're not, it's definitely not 24-hour. The materials for the building were on the floor plan page of the packet. So I don't know if you can pull that up real quick, but they were basically what you had stated. So we have some EFIS, some split face CMU, and some, I'm trying to think of what it's called, like a stone material, along with the blue canopies in the middle. Yep, right there. So those are all the materials.
Thank you, Leslie, that's helpful.
Could you comment on the thought process for concentrating more landscaping on the off-side front yards than on the primary front yard on
Sure.
the 9th Street side?
Absolutely. That can definitely be adjusted. One of the things that Tidal Wave likes to do is they like to leave the car wash side kind of open. So as people are driving by, you can see the cars going through the car wash. It's really part of their overall advertising. But we could definitely make some adjustments to that,
So
as
that-
well as noting that the smaller trees shown on the plan are ornamental, so we can make some adjustments as far as adding additional trees. We were really trying to also give that the space south of that a little bit more interest, because there's not really anything going on there right now.
But their idea is to frame the building with landscaping and leave the glass portion open to view.
Ideally, that would be the case, yes.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay. Is staff looking for any other clarification?
I think you had a question about loading activity, Dustin?
Correct, yeah.
So, right, we haven't designated any specific areas, but typically that would be done within any of the vacuum stalls, as it's very rare that they're all busy. So we would typically utilize the vacuum stalls as a loading area.
Can you speak to, with this not being a 24-hour facility, can you speak to the timing of which deliveries are usually done? Is it usually like off-peak hours? Is it when they're closed? Or do you have any information regarding when deliveries take place?
Right, I know they definitely try to schedule those during off-peak hours so it doesn't interfere with regular traffic. And also because they have a limited number of employees. So if the employee's busy taking care of the loading and unloading, they're not able to focus on the customers.
And what's the, I know you said low number of employees, so what's the total number of employees that may be there at one time?
Typically, it's about 3.
About 3?
Right.
So there's a self-pay station, and then so are the employees mainly in the car wash area itself?
Yes.
Okay.
I've been to some car washes where music is playing, and that's been a topic for other actions of this board recently. Is there going to be music playing here at this car?
Oh, well, I'll have to ask. I'm not sure, but that's a great question. I'll put that on my list.
So the vacuum stations, this is pretty much a self-serve on the vacuums, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, and then in one of the drawings for, it showed like a self-serve on the vacuum, so is this like a vending, is this like dispensing coins, or are they gonna be able to just pull up and use the vacuums, or do they have to pay for it? What's kind of within the vending part of it?
Right. Typically, this is all part of a package, and they try to do subscription programs. So you would, you could do it just a single use, but you would try to get people to sign up for a subscription. And part of that would be the use of the vacuums after you've gone through the car wash.
And all of the vacuums are covered under a canopy, is that correct?
I believe that's true, yes.
I think.
Oh, there's
the
a section that's
distinction is-
not, sorry.
Yeah,
Yep.
so I think the vacuums that are directly east of the car wash building are open air, if you will. They're not covered, where everything further to the east on the 3, I guess you call it the east 3 rows here, those would be the ones that would be covered.
Okay.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
One question I did have that I forgot to ask in my report in my presentation is, I'm going to pull up the site plan. So the 3 west rows that would be covered are these 3 here. And the stalls that are open air would be the ones directly to the east of the car wash. The question I have is, you have this exit point here, which appears to like go through a vacuum stall area, because you have a vacuum stall that is like out in the driving aisle here. And it appears that there may be some conflicts here. Can you speak to, is this a vacuum stall? Do the vacuum units hang out into the driveway the way it appears on the site plan? Or what kind of information can you give us about this particular piece of the plan?
Right. That's really intended as an escape lane. So if someone has gotten that far and they've decided they do not want to get their car washed, they don't want to go through the car wash, or maybe they just want to vacuum their car, they have that option to go through there as well.
So how would that be signified, so that if I pull in there and I'm going to vacuum, that I don't pull in there and block your escape route?
That is a great question. And I mean, we could definitely, we could hedge that out or stripe it instead.
Leslie, one of the recommendations on our report is that a permit for this project be obtained within 18 months of approval. Does that fit with your timeline?
Yes, it definitely does.
Okay. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay. Do we have anybody online for the public?
It does not appear that we do. I think staff would ask for clarification from the planning commission or some feedback on the landscape planting plan, with it being a little bit different where we don't have the 25 units in the front, 25 feet. If that's something that you want staff to take a hard line on, or if you want to provide flexibility where landscaping can be added on the south side or on the east side as being proposed on the plan. I'll just pull it up just so that you can kind of see what we're talking about. So So we have a number of trees that are being proposed on the south side of the driving aisle. We also have some on the east side that are not in the front 25 feet. And then you also have this barren area, this open area to the east of the car wash between Century Plaza Drive and the building structure that doesn't have a lot of landscaping. And staff would ask for feedback of how you would want the staff to administer the code in this particular case, and what your expectations are when, if you were to approve this plan and you ask the applicant to provide a revised planting plan, what specifically do you want to see?
I love the way it's set up. I've seen these before, and I know they use that glass for marketing, and it's a perfect opportunity for marketing right there on South 9th Street. So I was actually going to ask the question, what we needed to add into this to give leeway to staff about that 25-foot in the immediate front yard.
So there's a few things you could do. You could request that there be low growing vegetation in the area versus trees, and that a certain element of that would count towards the front yard landscaping. You could also approve the south area and east area be counted towards their landscaping requirements, even though those technically aren't front yards. You could allow for landscaping, so in other words, this landscaping here, you could allow for some of the landscaping to be distributed in the front yard area, but further south and further along Century Plaza Drive to the south, so that it still dresses up the site, still adds good, what we call like street frontage or street trees that aren't actually street trees, but having a good street corridor landscaping there. And there's a few options that you have. It's kind of what you feel comfortable with, what you think meets the spirit and intent of the landscape regulations. If we're deviating from the strict application of the landscape regulations, staff just needs to know what is acceptable and what isn't as we work with the applicant and their final plans when they submit for a building permit.
Dustin, what do we do for Discount Tire up there?
Well, Discount Tire, we use the strict application of the landscape regulations. And that, in fact, that's what we've done on all the outlets along 9th Street to this point, or along the Central Mall outlets to this point.
Can you scroll south on that, please? That's good. I'm just seeing where where their tree placement was on the south side, which I think is good. If you just got your car wash and you're out there vacuuming, a few of those trees can block the southern wind and dust from blowing on them.
And to me, that kind of goes with the intent. I all for the marketing value of showing what's happening there, and I would probably be, if we're going to discuss this a little bit, I'd probably be in favor of some low plantings. I wouldn't want just grass there only, but and then move some of those trees farther along the south.
Okay.
And the east side, use some of those too.
So my question would go back to the applicant then. So obviously the west elevation drawing shows the glass and it's all the way down to the ground at that point in time. Can you bring that elevation up?
Sure.
Yes. So obviously it's not your first one that you've done. Have you had situations where other communities have requested plantings along this side? I mean, I understand why you're trying to do it, but I think because we have been fairly strict along this area with the requirements for the plantings, unless there's a reason that we shouldn't. I mean, obviously, we don't want to put a bunch of trees, but if we can put some low plantings, bushes placed throughout, maybe not covering the whole thing, where you still have your opportunity for marketing, but it still meets our requirement within the city. Do you have objections to that?
Not at all.
Okay. Then I would suggest that we do that so that, because I know that was, at least with the Discount Tire, there was a large discussion on those plantings and how that was going to be done in keeping with the intent through that area, but still allow you to have that marketing opportunities.
So then if I'm to interpret what you've what you've noted, Commissioner Olson, we would have some low-growing shrubs on the east, and then we would count, we would move some of these trees a little closer to Century Plaza Drive, and we would count all of them as well as all the properties on the west side as if their front yard.
Yeah, the shrubs would be
landscaping
on the
areas.
west, not the east.
Low growing
Okay.
on the west.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So Dustin, couldn't it just be simply worded that part of the motion to approve the landscape plan is presented by the applicant's designer with the addition of low-growing shrubs between the car wash and Century Plaza Drive?
Possibly. I think the reason I hesitated is, I guess one of the questions is, are you still wanting to get 25 tree units? Because we don't have 25 tree units, it doesn't appear like to me yet.
So how many tree units do we have up there currently?
Well, I think it depends on if the big circles are shade trees.
And that's what she
Or-
said. And she said the
Yes.
smaller ones were ornamental.
Okay.
You know, where they're still kind of in the roadway there.
Because I count 20 of the big ones.
So we could, we could definitely add a couple more trees. That's not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question is how, because what I'm trying to do is sit in my seat and as I'm working with Leslie as we go through this process, you know, what is her target? So that she knows what the target is, I know what the target is, so that we know when we've met it.
You
know?
need a quantity.
And how many tree units are you saying is necessary?
25 is what would be required, so.
3, 1.
I think we should stick with the standard there. It's 25, just an
Yeah.
allowance for low shrubs.
Right,
I
so if you
agree.
have 25 being the required amount and you're giving latitude to the strict application of the 25 feet of frontage, so in other words, the trees on the east and the trees to the south, counting them even if they're not in the front 25 feet of a street frontage, then I think Leslie and I could work on a plan that meets those parameters.
Yes.
I would,
Definitely.
sounds like everybody's in agreement that that's what our intention is.
Sorry to make that way harder than it.
I'll make another attempt at translation at
Thank you.
that as a condition, you would be approving the landscape plan as presented by the applicant's designer with 25 total tree units being provided and the addition of low-growing shrubs between the car wash and Century Plaza Drive.
Exactly.
Yep.
Way to go, Dean.
That sounds like the direction we were going.
Are you ready for a motion with that, or in public?
Hold on, did we decide, was there anybody on the public?
There wasn't. I would say if you're getting ready to talk about motions, we have the 8 conditions that staff has recommended on 15. And as we talked, there's also potential 9th, where you could say that uses of the Planned Development District, PDD C5 zoning district, shall be limited to uses permitted in the C3 district plus car washes. That could be a potential 9th condition if that's something that you're interested in.
At this point, I'm going to close to public comment. I'm going to bring it back up to the discussion of the commission or a motion.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd recommend that we approve application PDD 81-4Q. Is somebody trying to talk?
It's feedback.
Sounds like
Oh, okay.
feedback.
Anyway, with the 8 conditions, with a 9th condition being that the zoning district be all the uses in a C3 plus adding a car wash. And then also to have Dustin work with the applicant on 25 total tree units and having some low shrubs be available to be on the west side of the actual car wash unit itself.
Second that.
All right, so we have a motion, second, and all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, motion carries 5-0. So that ends new business. That would take us to administrative items.
We have no administrative items
Thank you for the applicant.
this evening.
Thank you very much.
We have no preliminary discussion items this evening. In terms of other business, the only thing I would note is that the first Tuesday in July is July 5th, the day after the July 4th holiday. So I just remind you that July 4th may throw everybody off. That's being Monday, but we're back here on Tuesday after 4th of July, and we have 2 items to be considered at your July 5th meeting.
Did you hear that? I did. Look at you.
So it's 3-day weekend, not a 4-day weekend.
Gotcha. All right, so public forum, any comments from our interns setting through? Okay. So I would take a motion for adjournment.
I move we adjourn.
Okay. Second?
Go ahead. Second?
All right, so it's been motion second, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right.